Okay, so in the last lesson, what we did is we now have it where our enemy spawner reads in our scriptable object, which is here, which has our ships. Now, all we want to do is be able to spawn these at different intervals as they go through. What we're going to do is update our data, our scriptable object, which holds our data, with another variable. And we'll just call this one. I'm going to make this a serialized field so we can edit it in our viewport. And we'll just call this time between spawns. And we could set this to 2. Well, we'll set it for 1 for now, so it takes 1 second. And then what we can do is essentially use this time to as a way of, when we go into our enemy spawner here, to use it as a way to essentially call the spawn enemies method. All right, so let's go back to our scriptable object, and I'm just going to duplicate this public float move speed. And then let's put that on a new line. I didn't have a space between the ending closing braces in this one. And I'm just going to call this get time between spawns. And then it's just going to return the time between spawns. So now when we click in here, you can see we have time between spawns equals 1. Let's save that. Now we've done coroutines in the past. So this is kind of a refresher. Remember, there's 2 parts to the coroutine. And what the coroutine does is it delays calling a method. The first thing we need is, what is the method that we're going to be calling over a specific period of time? And then we have to give it a return type. And the return type is always IEnumerator for co-return. So we have IEnumerator here. Save that. And we got a little bit of an error here because we didn't put any sort of like what we're returning. So the reason for this is it's looking for the return on how long we want to wait before we do something. So inside of our for loop, what I want to do is I'm going to have it exit here. So yield, return, wait. We want to wait for seconds. And inside of this, we want to wait for so many seconds before we go back into here. And we want to make this new. And inside of here, you probably guessed the length we want to return is if we go back to our scriptable object here, we want this get time between spawns. And the way we have access to that is if you go all the way up here, we have this current wave here, which gives us access to the script. So I'm going to paste that in there, and I'm going to say get time between spawns. And so now what this will do is this will wait 1 second, and it'll instantiate this. It'll just kind of run through this method again and again until we get to the current or the last, as long as current wave is less than the enemy count is less than I. And just like a method I was explaining a second ago, there's 2 parts to it. One, you create essentially the IEnumerator, and then you call it, right? You create the coroutine, and then you call it. So I'm just going to do this inside of my start method here. And we are calling the spawn enemies here, but this isn't the way that you call a coroutine. You actually have to say, hey, at start, I want to start this coroutine, and then I'm going to wrap this spawn enemies inside of these parentheses here and save that. All right, let's go ahead and test this out. So we have 1 enemy here, we have 2 enemies here, 3 enemies here, and they spawn into our scene at 1 second intervals. We could do this randomly if we want to expand or build on our code. I think this is good for now, where we would build out, and that could be something that you do on your own. Is just say, okay, how do I change this get time betweens to being random instead of using a random range and a clamp and all that good stuff. Okay, so next what we're going to need is we have this where our enemy ships spawn out at intervals, and they go along this path here, so you can get them to pop up. Let's do it so that we actually have we create a list of these different paths, and we could have those happen randomly if we need to. So I'm going to create another serialized field here. So I'll just duplicate this guy, and it's going to be essentially a list of our waypoint scriptable objects. And we're going to give this another name here, and we're just going to call this, we'll just call this wave configs. And the reason for that is because each one of these is a wave. These waypoint paths here, they're a wave of those enemies coming. And it looks like we have an error here because we're missing let's see, there we go. It didn't register our using systems collections here. So we have to add that. I hit control and period to do that. And let's see. I want to also, let's grab, just to kind of save time between spawns. We're going to copy that, but what we're going to do is we're going to name it time between waves because it's really the time between each wave of enemies coming at us. And I'll set that, I'll just leave that at 1 as well. All right, so down here, I'm going to use a for each loop to wave through them because we don't need a iterator like this here to keep track. I just want to loop through all of them once when this enemy spawner script is selected. And I'm going to actually hold Alt and move that ending curling brace below this for loop here. Hit Control Alt Enter to just tab that in. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm looping through this list, right? So I need to actually have a variable here, and it's of the same type of that scriptable object here. And I'm just going to call this wave. And so this is going to represent an individual wave that's going to store all of the waves as we circle through our list here. And the first thing I want to do here is I'm just going to set my current wave to whatever that first wave is in our list. So I'm going to say current wave equals, and then just wave. And so what's going to happen here is as this loops through, it's going to store each wave inside of here, and then it's going to call this for loop. And once this wave is done, we'll go to the next wave. Now, how are we going to space it out so that it runs through each wave? So remember what happens here is in our for each loop, the first thing that happens is all this is doing is it's saying, okay, whatever the first element in our wave configs list is, which is going to be the path, we're going to store that in wave, and then we're going to set that as the current wave. This code spawns all of our ships in our scene. And then, so what we need is after this for loop, we need another yield return. So I'm going to hit Control D, hold Alt, and just move this down. Control Alt Enter to kind of space this out. So what am I waiting for? Well, remember we made this variable time between waves. So what this is going to do is this one will loop through all the way till the current wave reaches the end. And then it's going to get time between spawns, right? So this whole section here, this yield return here is just spacing out when them being spawned. This yield here is going to wait for the next, it's going to wait for the time between waves. So once this is all running, it's going to wait 1 second here because we have it set to 1 here. And then it's going to set to the, it'll go back to the loop and it'll go to the next wave, right? So if I save this, and you might be like, well, what was enemy spawner? Remember, enemy spawner is here. It's located here. And now, because we have this wave configs here, and it's a list, if I expand that, you'll see we have nothing in there. So we can actually set our waves inside of here, right? So our wave paths. So if we need to actually attach that. And remember, in order to do this, we need to actually drag these in, these two here. It's not the actual path itself, it's these scriptable objects. If you're having difficulty, you could lock this and then drag them in. So remember, we have this let me double click this, or we have these two different wave scriptable objects here, right? So let me unlock this for a second so you could see that. And this first one has all of these enemy ships. The second one doesn't have any enemy prefabs yet. So let me go ahead and, I wish I had a different one, but let's just do 2. Oops, wrong one. Here, I could just hit plus. Here's 2, and then these move at 5, and the time between spawns is 1. So you should be able to see once it's done spawning this wave, which is 4, and they go quickly. We'll wait 1 second. You'll see that the next wave will come at a much slower speed here. So let's press play here. You can see that these guys are quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then these guys are much slower. And you got to remember, they're working on the other path. That's why they're moving like that, because they're down here. Because remember, if we look at this second path down here, it's actually using this path. And even though it's not in our scene, it's remembering the position of those scriptable objects, because it's the position here is -7 and the one here is -7. That's why, like, even though it's not in our scene, this scriptable object is still operating from the same location and positioning as that path that's inside of here. So it's just still following the transforms, even though it's not in there. So we could, in all theory, in all essence, delete this one too. And now when I press play, you'll see that they'll appear and we no longer need those because they're already saved. See, they show up in our scene. And then the other ones will come down here. This guy's much slower. So that's a way of creating multiple waves as well as multiple enemies. Always make sure checking your stuff to version control and just save all your scripts.